All right. Well, there we got a little bit of a delay there, but welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg, and I'm so happy to welcome Andy Ellis back to the program. Andy, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Hal. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. It was good to see you over the weekend. I'm glad we got a chance to catch up and hang out a little bit at the Green Man Festival there in Greenbelt.
Yeah, it was a beautiful day and a fun festival, and we had some good conversation. And I got a cat who just joined us, so he might be here on and off throughout the show. But
Pretty cool. Yeah, no, good conversations. And I noticed we'll get into the specific topic and the question, which is, are reparations part of the answer, not the answer, but part of it? After we discuss briefly the situation in Gaza, which I always center the victims of empire, specifically Israel and the United States genocide. But I just real quick wanted to just stick with the Green Man Festival for a moment, because what I saw, what I observed, I'm sure you did as well, in the couple hours we were sharing a table, a lot of dissatisfaction about politics, a lot of dissatisfaction with both political parties, and specifically the Democrats. This is a very democratic area, right?
yeah.
But I think there was also trepidation about embracing an alternative.
Sure, there are. So we have these signs that say billionaires own both parties. The Green Party is the future. And I think almost everybody who doesn't work for the DNC or the RNC agrees with the first half of that. I think the second part of that is the case that we have to make. But I think the first part of that, establishing that billionaires run both parties and that people's voices don't matter, is an opening to a conversation that allows people to understand what our argument is, which is the Green Party is the future, because we are not bought and paid for by corporations. We're not bought and paid for by billionaires. And we have the set of solutions, not just to stop Trump this time, but to stop the rising tide of fascism and Trumpism. So, I think it's a provocative slogan, and I think having it on a sign there is a good way to get people to stop and talk. And I thought we had some good conversations, even amongst folks who had trepidation about whether they agreed with the Green Party as the future or not.
Yeah, here, and you just want to also remind folks, please do click subscribe, click like. I got the subscribe bell there on the screen for a moment. The thing that I think is so problematic is the Democratic Party's actions have definitely fostered Trumpism, right? They've actually incentivized people to move away from them, and the basic alternative is Republicans and further and more extremism. But then they use that fact to say you can't vote Green because then you're helping the very people that we've helped.
Right, exactly, right. I think there's a lot of people who, as scared as they are in the moment and as worried as they are about the future for themselves and their families and their communities, are also seeing the game more and more clearly than they've ever seen it. And while they might not agree that we are the alternative right now, I think there's more and more people I talk to these days who understand the necessity for an alternative and understand the basic premise that going back to Joe Biden is not going back to what it was like under Joe Biden is not going to solve the underlying conditions that created Trump's rise to power, and then now his, sort of really powerful second term. And so, the world around us is troubling and scary and full of war and genocide and inequality. And I think there's a lot of people who are waking up to it who have not been awake to it for a long time. So,
well, those existential realities that you just described are definitely layable at the feet of, if that's a word, of the Democrats as well as the Republicans. Certainly the genocide in Gaza, the endless proxy war with Russia, and the climate catastrophe all, are due in large part due to Democratic actions as well as at this point Republican. Just to point out how badly the Democrats have done things, how badly they've acted. We see the continuing genocide in Gaza, which Trump has actually doubled down on. 20 more killed. We have a death toll, according to WAFA, which is a Palestinian news agency. I was struggling with that yesterday. 52,928 killed since October 7, Andy. And these numbers just never fail to just break my heart. I don't know how else to say it. Whenever I think about it, I just get heartbroken. I put up the count here. We have, again, 52,928. So that's repeating what we just saw from WAFA. And close to 2,800 now since Trump took office. And I always want to point out how terrible the toll has been on children, because I think, we naturally, and I don't think this is something that's a problem with us, but as humans, I'm older. The thought of this folks who are 50 years, 60 years younger than I am being killed is just, their whole lives should be in front of them. They should have happiness. They should have love. And now they have nothing.
Yeah. And I mean, for those who are not killed, there's chronic injuries, there's famine, there's chronic malnourishment. The impacts of this on the people of Palestine and the people of Gaza are going to be devastating for generations, even for those who don't die in it. I think one of the things for me that has been so clear about talking to voters all across the state of Maryland over the last couple of years is those who recognize this will never trust the two parties again, because they watched as both of them sat by and did nothing, and not only did nothing, fueled it, justified it, and paid for it. And so I think there is a moment right now where there is a de-alignment from the two parties as a result of watching a genocide happen on our phones and having them tell us it doesn't matter. And I think that that has to be part of any politics that we have going forward that talks about any solution that is beyond the one that we have right now. And, in the state of Maryland, we don't have as much control over this at the state level as we do at the federal level, but we can stop the executive order which prevents people from boycotting Israel. We can stop cooperating with the Maryland Israel Development Center. We can stop some of the inter-university cooperation that is going on, and we can divest our economy from war and genocide here in the state. So I think that there are parts of this that we can address as part of a state politics campaign, and I think it has to be part of every conversation.
I'm really, really happy to hear you say that, Andy, because I was going to interview a candidate for lieutenant governor in Virginia who is running on a very pro-worker, in the Democratic primary, running on a very pro-worker platform, and much that I agreed with. And I mentioned to them that, I wanted to bring up the genocide, our support, our unwavering commitment to Israel. And they were very uncomfortable with that. And they didn't want to talk about it. They didn't want to address it. They said it had nothing to do with a state office. Lieutenant Governor and I pointed out, well, you have a bill that was introduced by Republicans that would outlaw supporting boycott, divestment, and sanctions, and that states specifically the support that the state of Virginia has for Israel. So it isn't just a national or federal or congressional issue. And they were like, we don't want to do this interview. And I'm like, wow, that's weird, huh?
Right. We probably cannot stop the genocide here from Maryland, but we can stop being complicit in it, and we can stop throwing our support behind the state of Israel. And Wes Moore has mealy-mouthed about this as he has about anything else. Early on, he said that Maryland stands with Israel, and a couple of other times he said things like, we care about our Palestinian friends and brothers, whatever. Like, there are material ways the state of Maryland is benefiting the genocidal Israeli regime right now, and we need to end those. And so, one of the things that we will do on day one, after we go out to dinner with my family and see all that, we will repeal that executive order that talks about boycott, or that prevents people from boycotting and working with state agencies. Wes Moore should have never carried it over from Larry Hogan, but he did. And I think that tells you a lot about things that both parties agree on. We started talking about both parties are run by billionaires, and the Green Party is the future. Both parties also agree on unwavering support for Israel, despite clear apartheid and genocide. And so that's another place where we need an alternative, where we need something that is better than what we have right now, that is rooted in values like justice, democracy, peace, and ecology.
Andy, do you want to draw a connection, because you are on the program to focus on call to action with respect to reparations in the state of Maryland. And although we agree on much, this is an area where there is daylight between us. I want you to just, so we'll get into that, but I want you to just maybe draw connections if you see them between your call to support a bill that would study how to implement reparations in the state. Maybe connect that with your condemnation, my condemnation of our support for Israel, and also, if to the extent that you see connections, and then talk about this bill and why it's so important.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of interesting discussion to talk about how the issues of, enslavement in the United States, segregation in the United States, legalized apartheid in the United States connect to what is going on in Palestine. And I think that having a root in justice and anti-imperial and anti-colonial thinking helps to draw those connections. I think there's, I don't know, I think we can talk about the connections there, but ultimately, I think having a value-based politics that puts people at the center, that tries to remedy past injustice and that believes in justice and democracy, does not believe in war, and does not believe in apartheid is probably a sufficient connection. But I would like to talk about this bill because I think that we can come on and talk about Israel and Palestine anytime. I'm happy to have that conversation. But right now in the state of Maryland, on Wes Moore's desk is SB 587. And SB 587 would establish a Maryland Reparations Commission, which would explore different ways that, it would do some historical research. It would do some data mining. It would look at other policy solutions around the country for which reparations have been paid to people who were enslaved in the United States or to who were the victims of legalized discrimination, Jim Crow, those type of things. So SB 587 is a study bill. It's a commission bill. It does not actually require any action, but it does have really specific things that it has to study. It has to study the history and legacy of slavery in Maryland. It has to study the history and legacy of legalized discrimination, and it has to study the history and legacy of Jim Crow. It also has to study other solutions around the nation that have come up, and it also will study, different people who benefited from it, different organizations who benefited from it. The recommendations for SB for the Reparations Commission, if Wes Moore signs it, will land on the desk of the next governor of Maryland in January of 2027. So whoever is the next governor, whether it's me or Wes Moore or Larry Hogan or Ehrlich or whoever it is, right? One of the first things they will have to deal with is the recommendations from the Reparations Commission. And then those are the initial recommendations. There will be some debate and some discussion about it. And then in November of 2027, final recommendations will be due. So that sort of puts a timeline where during the next presidential race in 2028, the General Assembly will have the opportunity to start looking at actual reparations policy in the state of Maryland. Now, if you believe that Wes Moore is considering running for president, he said he's not, but many people speculate that is a dodge. That would mean that while he was in New Hampshire and South Carolina and on the primary trail, Democrats in the Maryland General Assembly would be pushing a bill through that talked about reparations for enslaved people and for Jim Crow. So that bill is sitting on his desk. We were at a rally last week in Annapolis asking him to sign it. He has had 4 bill signings so far this year, and he has not signed it. The last opportunity he has to sign it is next Tuesday. If he doesn't sign it, it could go into effect without his signature. He could just try to duck the issue and let it slide by, or he could veto it. So we will know in the next week what is going to happen with that bill. On our website, on the gogreen.com reparations page, we detail some of our thoughts about why this bill is good and why it is useful as study bills go. But at the end of the day, it's worth remembering the question right now in front of Wes Moore is not, does the state of Maryland pay reparations? The question in front of Wes Moore is, should we have a commission that studies paying reparations?
So all of this is really fascinating. I'm quite interested in the fact that Maryland Black Caucus has the Legislative Black Caucus has united behind this legislation, and there's a lot of progressive support for it. It disappoints me that the Black Caucus wouldn't support, for example, a bill to study and implement Healthy Maryland, which would be single-payer health care, which I think would provide an immediate, significant benefit to many, many African Americans and white residents. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't take a step that you recommend, which is towards reparations. But I do have concerns, and let me raise several of them, and maybe seriatim or however. But and let me just start politically. Are you concerned that this bill pits poor, struggling, and working people against each other? Poor, struggling, and working white people and poor, struggling, and working black people, thereby making it more difficult to have the political revolution I think we both believe is essential?
I am concerned about that because I believe that Democrats and Republicans have made that the case when we talk about reparations. I believe that over the years, as this debate has occurred, they have polarized on it in a way that allows for that separation to occur. I don't actually think that it has to be that kind of polarization, because I do think that any type of reparations program, a reparations program that aimed to close the racial wealth gap in the state of Maryland would likely do a lot to help the rest of the economy of Maryland. And I think it would help all sorts of communities. I think working class black folks often live in communities with working class white folks, despite what we think about what we see on the news or what we hear otherwise. I think there's a lot of those communities that are sharing space and working together. And so, I think that there is a way to talk about reparations as a specific remedy for past harms that came from state policy, not as a broad check or a race-based solution, but as a solution for people who were harmed by state policy. And so, yeah, I think that there is division around this issue, and I think it is divisive, but I think it is divisive because the two parties have made it divisive, because it's beneficial for both of them to be able to limit the debate and make it divisive.
All right. Phone number, by the way, if you have questions for Andy or me, or, just to opine, 240-242-5646. You can see that on your screen, 240-242-5646. And I appreciate that response. I really don't want to push back too hard. I get what you're saying, but if you, and of course, there are many integrated neighborhoods in Maryland, and many of us live in more segregated areas. My neighborhood is pretty much only white people, so I'm not one of those who lives in a more integrated neighborhood. But I can imagine in a working class community where you have African Americans, Latinos, Asians, and white people all living close to each other, maybe going to maybe not all going to work at the same place, but similar working environments. There might be a lot of resentment, I would think, among those who are not African Americans, saying, wait a second, my house isn't worth any more than their house is. I don't even make any more money. They actually got a promotion and I'd in last go round. Why are they getting this check and I'm not?
Yeah. So, first of all, I want to be clear that our policy is not every African American in the state of Maryland gets a single check one time that is a big check or something like that. Most reparations policy is in
Hold on one sec, because I'm getting some calls in. Let me just mute the caller because we want to hear your answer, Andy. And I'm very sorry to. There we go. All right, go ahead. Yes, I got you muted, caller. We'll get you in just a moment. You're saying the policy is not to cut a check necessarily, right. But to address past harm and how it impacts on people today, correct?
Right. So Supreme Court decisions that talked about race-based solutions being problematic that have come out recently, I think actually create a really good opportunity to have a focused discussion on reparations that talks about the way that specific people and specific communities were harmed by state policy in the past and the way that goes forward. So you will see in our description, we talk about identifying people whose ancestors were enslaved in the state of Maryland, or people whose homes were lost or devalued because of specific policies and things like that. It is not a every person who identifies as Black gets a check cut to them type of thing. It is a means of identifying folks who had harm that were done to them. Their business was taken, they were enslaved, their home was taken, and then figuring out what the recompense for that is. And there's a second part to it, which is figuring out communities that were targeted via the war on drugs and via other racist policy, and making sure that those communities have resources to rebuild themselves. Now, I will say, if it is just reparations, and if reparations were the only way that we tried to address the conditions that working class Marylanders were facing, I think it would be very divisive. But I think reparations need to go along with an embrace of a solidarity economy, along with the guarantee that healthcare, education, and housing are human rights, along with an expansion of political power and grassroots democracy, and along with breaking free from the corporate and fossil fuel control over the energy company. So I think if it was just reparations and it was just we are only trying to remedy or deal with the situation that people whose descendants or whose ancestors were enslaved in the state felt, or people whose homes were taken by redlining felt, that it would be divisive. But I don't think that it should be that. I think it should be part of a broader vision of what a Maryland looks like that heals its past and prepares for its future.
All right, that's a really interesting answer. And I said to you before, and we had this conversation, I'm not dogmatic. I think there's a lot of arguments that are very good for the kind of policies you're describing. And when we're addressing the specific harms that individuals are facing now as a result of government policies, I think that is very, makes a lot of sense. Is very sensible. Let's go to the phones. Caller, you're on with Andy. Who's this?
Hi, Hal and Andy. It's me, Michael. Good afternoon.
Hey, go ahead. What's on your mind, Michael?
Andy, I'm doing great. How are you doing today, Andy?
I'm good.
Yeah, so, Andy, Hal, I just want to let you know, reparations, right? So Andy and I have been working very closely on reparations. Andy and I agreed that, reparations has to be, cash payment. Yeah, it has to be cash payments plus other tangible. And Hal, to go back to what you said earlier about how reparations will be very divisive, how a lot of people, how working class white people, working class Black people find it very divisive. I would disagree, Andy. As a matter of fact, Hal, more Americans are supporting reparations.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand. Michael, I hate to be rude, but just try to be brief with your question or comment.
Yeah.
Heard what you had to say, but I didn't quite catch your last point.
Right. The last point I'm trying to make is that, no, reparations is not divisive. Actually, more Americans support reparations today than they did 25 years ago. So the problem is not who's going to get more money or not. The issue is that people don't want to see Black American families get a debt paid to them. A debt is owed. Other groups have received reparations. Jewish people have received reparations under Obama administration. Japanese Americans have received reparations. Hispanics or migrants have received reparations or other tangible forms. The only people who have not received reparations is Black American freedmen. So I disagree that reparations will be very divisive. It's not a divisive issue. It's only divisive between Democrats and Republicans because they're dominated by white people who don't want to see Black Americans do for self and thrive economically. So reparations is not about a program. It's a debt that is owed. Period. It's period. Because we don't tell other groups how they should define reparations, what reparations should look like. So it's same with Black American freedmen. Let them get the debt as alternate so they can do for self and they can invest in their own Black economy. And plus, they're going to stimulate other businesses as well. So please think about that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for that call there, Michael. And what was his last point? I didn't catch it. I heard what he said about Obama and Jewish reparation or Holocaust reparations and I guess Asians, Japanese. But what was the point?
I think Michael's making two important points there. One, reparations are not specifically a discussion about how we address things for freedmen or for formerly enslaved people or whatever. They're a piece of policy that is used to address previous wrongs, that is used to address when the government has government, private institutions, businesses have contributed to inequity. The second thing he's making is a point that I was making earlier, that is that if you were to close the racial wealth gap in the state of Maryland, and Brooke Lehrman cites a stat that says the average black household in the state of Maryland is $25,000 worth of wealth, and the average white household has $188,000 worth of wealth. If you were to close that wealth gap via policy, you would be benefiting other people in working class communities. You would be benefiting the economy at large, right? So I think that reparations is a redistribution of resources that were wrongly taken, or a recompense for harm that was done in the past. And I think that if you structure it in a good way, you can do it in a way that is not, as divisive as Republicans and Democrats want to make it. Now, part of the reason it's divisive for Republicans and Democrats is because they don't want to do the universal things that would help the white working class, or they don't want to provide housing as a human right, and they don't want to provide healthcare as a human right. So when you for them, it is a talking point that is used when they need to, oftentimes for many Democrats, not for the folks in the Black Caucus who put this bill together, but for many Democrats at the national level or at the state level, it's used as a talking point at election time. And I think we need to get away from that and start talking about specific remedies for specific harms that still have long-lasting effects today.
All right, we've got another caller, Andy. I'll get to that caller in just a moment, but the point that you make about poverty and addressing it and reducing the income and wealth gap, I think is a good one. But if there's going to be some plan to try to reduce it by guaranteeing all African Americans a certain amount, or to that degree, so that they're not poor.
African Americans. It's not like neither the commission policy nor what I'm recommending is that every person who identifies as African American gets a reparation. In fact, that would be a race-based policy that is probably illegal according to the Supreme Court at this point. However, if you identify people who were victims of racist policy, and there are people, when we talk about redlining, it's not like it was an incalculable thing, or we talk about urban renewal, it's not an incalculable thing. There are people who owned homes who were devalued as a result of state and local policy at the time, and those people's some of those people who are still alive in terms of redlining or urban renewal, or some of their kids saw the property that their parents had invested in decrease in value. So it is not a policy that says all African Americans would get a check. In fact, that is the current Moore approach, I think, to decreasing the racial wealth gap, is minority set-asides and minority business set-asides and things like that, without folks being in a situation where there is a requirement that they and their ancestors have been harmed, right? And I think that's a really important distinction here, is I think the liberal approach to this is race-based policy. I think what we're arguing for is that there are specific people who were the victims of specific racist policy, and those racist policies have long-lasting effects, and those are the folks who should be qualified. Those people in communities are the ones that should get reparation because they were harmed.
All right, let's go to the phones. We got another caller. You're on the air with Andy and Hal. Go ahead, Ari. Is this Ari? Maybe it's not Ari. Who do I have? Oh, I guess they're on hold. Let me take them off. Do I have you, caller?
I'm here.
Well, I guess not.
Hello.
Go ahead. Yes.
It's Ari. Sorry about that. I was on mute. Okay.
Go ahead, Ari. What's your question, comment, or concern?
Thank you, Ari. Thank you, Hal. And hello, Andy. I have just a couple of questions, and thank you for what you're doing, Andy. You're doing, I think, an amazing job, both of you guys. By the way, my first question is the one about the reparations. On the surface, I think people will perceive it and conceive it in a certain way, unless you explain it like you did very well, Andy, a little while ago. When you go into it, it does make sense. It's a very important topic. But on the surface, I think people get this perception. It has a different connotation. That's my first question. And what do you think about that? And I have a follow-up after that.
Yeah. So I think that the two-party system benefits from creating that misrepresentation of it. Republicans want to say we don't have to be responsible for past wrongs. Democrats want to say it's incalculable and we couldn't solve the problems of the past. And so they use that in order to frame the debate and stop the debate about whether reparations are due. And what we are trying to do is move past that to a question of what should we do, not are they due.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you. And my follow-up would be a little bit related to, as far as the other topics of importance to the public. Like, are you looking at polls that show that the most important things dear to the heart of the American public are the following, like Medicare, education, affordable education, and so forth?
Yeah, and I mean, we don't have to look at the American public broadly at that. We can look at specific polls in Maryland that talk about the importance of the price of healthcare, the price of housing, the quality of education, and things like that. And I think we need to have a policy to address each and every one of those. I had a conversation with a woman at the Green Men Festival who was interested in reparations, but she was more interested in the price of rent and the apartment that she lives in, where a bunch of seniors live, and they're getting priced out. Neither the Democrats nor the Republicans had any solution for renters in Maryland this year. And if I'm the governor, or if we have, support of Greens in the legislature, we're going to push to make sure that rent is capped, especially for seniors and especially in places that are senior housing. So, yeah, I mean, I think all of those issues have to go together as part of a...
Okay, hold on one sec, one at a time. Ari, just let Andy finish.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think all of those things, housing, healthcare, education, price of everything, has to go along with a discussion about reparations. We can't do one or the other. We have to do it all.
All right, final response, Ari, and then we're going to move on. Oh, he hung up. Okay, that's fine. I guess he figured it out. Andy, so anything else you wanted to add on to that before I just want to talk about kind of, I guess, the logistics I put up here, why you think this bill isn't just a kick the can down the road kind of thing.
Yeah, so I mean, this bill lays out specific timelines in it. So the bill says that by January of 2027, the recommendations of the commission have to go in front of the governor and the General Assembly. So that means the next governor of Maryland, very close to the time they are inaugurated, is going to have those recommendations land on their desk. And if this bill passes, I think we need to understand what I'm going to do, what Wes Moore is going to do, what Larry Hogan or Bob Ehrlich is going to do, and we need to be able to ask those questions, I think, in a debate. After that, there's some time for the legislature and the governor to discuss the recommendations, and then final recommendations are due in November of 2027, which cues up the 2028 legislative session as the first time that we would see policy coming out of the commission. I think that's a perfect time because I think it's really important to have that be a front and center issue during a presidential year. But I imagine, other folks might not like that idea so much.
Yeah. Any ideas, or have you heard anything about what Moore is likely to do?
I have heard many things. I have heard all three outcomes are possible. We will see. We will be prepared for whichever outcome comes. If he signs the bill, we will welcome him signing it and encourage it to be a part of the debate in the 2026 election. And we will push along with the folks who advocated for this bill to get us on the debate stage with the Democrats and the Republicans so that we can talk about it. If he doesn't sign the bill, we will remind folks that he doesn't want to talk about it and make sure that he has to talk about it. And if he vetoes the bill, if he vetoes the bill, we will probably offer a different policy solution to it. But I think there will be, I think this has the potential to be a red line issue for him in the 2026 election and in future elections if he vetoes the bill.
If the bill is passed, if the governor signs the bill, or even if he just lets it, sit and then it becomes law, doesn't that, I hate to ask it this way, but doesn't that weaken your case for governor?
No, I don't think so, because we want to talk about, so like that becomes a political, if he vetoes it, it's a political win for us. We get to say, aha, he vetoed it. Look, we're the Green Party. We've supported this for 25 years and we would have signed it. If he passes it, which I hope he does, we also get to have a policy debate about it. And I think it's really important to have a policy debate about these things, because too often it is abstracted into a question of whether we should cut a big check to all Black people or African American people or something like that. And we don't get into the nuts and bolts of what we would do to implement this policy to repair the past harms in the state of Maryland. So I hope he signs it. And we can have a political discussion about it and a policy discussion about it. I'm more than happy to, talk about the politics of it, but I really want to talk about the policy of it, because for 25 years, the Green Party has had reparations in its platform, and we have developed an understanding of what policy works and what policy doesn't work as it relates to this question. And I would love to have that debate with Wes Moore and Larry Hogan and whoever else is on that stage.
All right, just to digress a little bit, I was looking at the Green Party platform. As you mentioned, you have your party by far the strongest, most consistent support for that form of racial justice and ending these massive economic and wealth disparities that have grown ever larger between whites and blacks since the 1950s, even despite the civil rights movement, but because of government policies addressing poverty, colorblind policies, or even sometimes white favoring policies that still address poverty, because those are largely have been sidelined or just eliminated. The wealth gap, along with, there's other factors as well. The wealth gap between blacks and whites has continued to grow, reaching enormous levels. The Green Party has always been a champion of addressing this terrible problem that we face, a relic of slavery. Mike, it made me think about how, and this so disappointed me, and I don't know if you want to weigh in, it's not really directly germane, but Dr. Cornel West said he wasn't going to run as a Green because he felt that the Green Party wasn't sufficiently, in support of, I guess, policies designed to end racism, to address racism and empire. I was gobsmacked by that. I don't know if you had any reaction to that, but I think it was so disappointing too, because he had a chance to really build on the vote for Greens.
Yeah, I think we've talked about this in the past, right? Like, Cornel West is a person that I have appreciated for a very long time. I first read one of his books in 1994, and I was excited about the idea of him being a candidate with the Green Party. I think as things started to develop, he became less excited about that idea, and some Greens became less excited about that idea. And whatever, here we are, and I think we need to move on. And I think it's actually really good to be able to have this conversation at the state level, because look, Michael and I agree that cash reparations needs to be a big part of this. And states, especially Maryland, and I want to talk a little bit about why Maryland is unique in this regard. States and localities have a responsibility to play here, but the large-scale cash reparations that are oftentimes the center of the debate are really mostly going to be a federal responsibility, because A, they have the monetary ability to handle that type of thing much easier, and B, the federal government is responsible at large scale for enslavement, Jim Crow, and civil rights disparities in the United States. So it's like, I think that it is important for states to begin to understand the role they play, and for us to be able to formulate state level policy about these questions. And so, that's where we are right now.
And you talked about, and I'm putting up on the screen now, some of the, I guess, the specific remedies that this legislation might include, because it hasn't, come down yet. Even even it hasn't even passed, but even if it does become law, they still have to make recommendations. But one thing you focus quite a bit on is the present harm to individuals that resulted from state policies that were, either deliberately or inadvertent, or whatever, accidentally. I mean, that's the wrong word, racist. But one thing I was thinking about, and I assume that focus doesn't obviate your view that even if somebody just purely by their own stupidity, their selfishness, despite being born with all the advantages, let's say a millionaire, somebody who had, an extremely privileged background, but maybe they're a gamaholic, they're an alcoholic, they just have extremely bad luck, they find themselves down and out, sleeping under bridges, you would not take the position that they do not deserve government support to at least have enough to live in some level of security and comfort.
Absolutely. We need to make sure that healthcare, housing, and education are treated as human rights in the state of Maryland, and nobody is sleeping under a bridge, and nobody is going untreated for, alcoholism if they want to get treatment for it. So I do not think that these are separate things. I think that we can say we are going to make sure that nobody is without a home in the state. And we are also able to say that those people and communities that were targeted by racist policy in the past have recompense.
Let's talk about these specifics that are on the website. By the way, you can go to gogreen2026.com. It's on the screen, the whole program, right next to Andy's, or right under Andy's name. But address these bullet points that you have on your website.
Yeah, so, if I'm the governor, when this comes, or if this bill doesn't pass and we have to fashion our own reparations policy, there's a couple of things that we're going to include in that reparations policy in order to make sure that we take the experience that we have as Greens who have been advocating for this for 25 years and apply it to the state of Maryland. The first one is more revenue for the Community Repair and Reinvestment Fund. So the 2023, I believe, Cannabis Reform Act established the Community Repair and Reinvestment Fund, and it directed a certain percentage of recreational cannabis funds toward the counties that had the most arrests from during the war on drugs that were related to cannabis. That is Baltimore City, Baltimore County, Prince George's County, Montgomery County, and those are the places that were most impacted by what we can pretty clearly understand was racist policing and racist drug policy at the time. So the Community Repair and Reinvestment Funds also required that each county establish a democratically controlled commission in order to distribute those funds, because the idea is that grassroots democracy works better when you can put pressure on your county officials to distribute the funds than letting somebody in Annapolis decide, who in Baltimore City should get those funds. So we would use some progressive taxation and carve back some of the money from the cannabis, the increase in the cannabis tax, in order to add more money to those funds. They're working. They're starting to get established at each county level. We think that is a good vehicle for communal impacts of reparations or communal impacts of the war on drugs. So we would expand that. The second thing here I think is really fascinating. So the way that the bill is written right now is it has two time periods which it covers. It covers anybody who was enslaved in the state of Maryland, which means, I guess we can say like 1776 to 1864, when slavery was outlawed by the state constitution. And then it covers the time from it covers the post-Reconstruction era through Jim Crow, so 1877 through 1965. What's fascinating about that is because Maryland was not in rebellion against the United States of America, the Emancipation Proclamation and Reconstruction did not apply here in the same way. So, Emancipation Proclamation only applied to the states of the Confederacy, much like, Lincoln's order, Lincoln's field order that allowed, allowed freedmen to have land in the Confederacy. All of those things were only applied to the Confederacy. But because Maryland was a Union state that had 87,000 people enslaved at the start of the Civil War, those things didn't apply to it. So Maryland's Reconstruction was self-administered. It was administered by the state government of Maryland and not by the federal government. Freedmen's Bureau was here. They were doing some things, but they didn't have the same authority as they did over the former Confederate states. What that means is that by 1866 in Maryland, the Constitution had been rewritten, and it had 1864 version of the Constitution frees any persons who are enslaved at that point. Emancipation comes there. That also removed Confederates and Confederate sympathizers from being able to vote and serve in office in 1864. By 1866, the Democrats have regained power. In 1867, a new constitution is signed, and that new constitution allows the former Confederates and the Confederate sympathizers to vote again, so and to hold power again. So by 1867, in the state of Maryland, Democrats have retaken control of the state of Maryland, and the reconstruction that is happening between 1864 and then is truncated. Why that's important is because most of the rest of the Deep South and of the Confederate states had federal oversight during that time. Maryland did not. And so, like I said, Democrats who were former slaveholders, who were the ones who had benefited from that economy, regained and consolidated power in 1867. So what this would do, what this piece of it would do, would be to expand the scope of the commission so that it is covering those time periods and not just starting at the end of Reconstruction. That was the time when the apprentice programs were, or the apprentice laws were working in Maryland, and they were basically recommitting children of freedmen back to the plantation owners who they had once worked for. So that type of thing was happening in Maryland at the time, and it shaped a whole lot of the future going forward. So that's a long way to say, as drafted right now, the bill leaves out an important period of Maryland history as it relates to this. And so one of the recommendations that we would make would be to expand the scope of the commission to go from the time that the state of Maryland started until 1965, at the when the civil rights when those civil rights bills were passed in the end of Jim Crow.
Andy, if the bill passes and their recommendations are implemented, what's your vision? Like, can you kind of give us like a vision of what Maryland would look like in, say, 20 years, 30 years?
Yeah, so I mean, if the racial wealth gap in Maryland were closed, I believe that it would solve a whole lot of other problems. I believe that it would help us reignite a localized economy where there's a lot of cooperatives, where there's a lot of small businesses, where there's a promise of equality that never really materialized. And so I think that would be really important in Maryland. I also think one of the pieces that we talk about is the right to return. And Maryland was a southern Maryland, and the eastern shore of Maryland were the South. And so from the time of 1864 forward, there was a lot of racial terror. There was a lot of local laws that chased people out of their homes and out of their businesses and out of their property. And folks migrated to different parts of the country. I'd like to see those folks be encouraged to move back, to be able to benefit from this reparation policy and to help us build a Maryland that offers, that reckons with this history, but also lifts up the folks who are most disadvantaged by the racial wealth gap right now. Again, it's not by itself. It's not a singular policy. I also see it as part of a solidarity economy that we need to build, where we're relocalizing economics in Maryland, where we're growing the strength of small businesses, where we're growing the strength of cooperatives, where we have a public bank, where we have universal health care, where we have universal housing. And so I think I see a vision of Maryland in 20 years where we don't have the stunning poverty that we have right now. We don't have the inequality. We don't have people choosing not to get health care because they can't afford it. We don't have people who don't have housing. We don't have people who are forced to deal with schools that aren't working for them. It may be an idealistic vision, but I think we need to have a vision that works for everybody, and a vision where we have an economy that is operated off of solidarity and not off of exploitation, where past wrongs have been written and a future is bright because people have what they need in this, which is one of the richest states in the country.
So, Andy, I know you and I do know that you and I see massive wealth gaps as extraordinarily problematic, whether they're between races or within races. So do you also see, and I don't want to say this is a softball question, but let me ask it this way. How do you see reparations as part of a strategy, not just to reduce or eliminate a racial wealth gap, but a top to bottom wealth gap?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, I think a lot of the top to bottom wealth gap is driven by a racial wealth gap. So solving the racial wealth gap would solve a lot of the rest of that numerically and factually on its face. The second thing is, I think a reparation policy that is in conjunction with the grassroots democracy policy and a solidarity economy is injecting more money into a Maryland economy so that Maryland businesses have more opportunity to employ people, more opportunity to grow, more customers, more consumers, all of that. I think one of the things that is essential is to get away from making our economy dependent on the federal government or multinational corporations. And the multinational corporations will take our tax breaks and then flee to Alabama as soon as they can when they get a better tax break or something like that. And so I see these things as working together. As we build an economy that works for everybody, that is communal, that is cooperative, and that is collaborative, closing the racial wealth gap via reparations will also, inject a bunch of resources into a localized economy that I think helps everybody. Beyond that, we need to make sure that the safety net is there. We need to make sure that there is nobody without housing, nobody without healthcare, nobody without education. And I think if we do those things together, we can have a Maryland that works for everybody. I think if we only do the part where we are providing universal housing, healthcare, and education, it is great, but that racial wealth gap is going to remain, and that inequality that it drives is going to remain.
All right, Andy Ellis with us. Andy from the Green Party. GoGreen2026.com is his website. And I did want to end the program with just a little bit of a discussion about the role of the Green Party in trying to make a better America and whether it arguably could even be part of the problem, which I certainly contend the so-called progressives in the Democratic Party are. In other words, people like AOC and her cohort are not necessarily, in my view, making things better. In fact, they may be preventing essential change. I heard an argument on Facebook that really intrigued me, that the Green Party too is part of the problem. And I want to discuss it with you, Andy. But before we do, I want to make sure you've gotten the points you wanted to make about the reparations bill that's currently sitting on Governor Moore's desk, why you support it, why you think it's the right decision for Maryland, and how it's part of your campaign for governor next year. Have we left anything out that you really want to talk about?
We have not. Let me close with this. I think it's important for us to study this. That is all the bill that is on Governor Moore's desk would do, is to study it and to make recommendations. So I encourage people to go to our site and look for the links that allow you to take action, to send a letter to Governor Moore and to tell him to sign this. Once this bill passes, once he passes this and agrees we should study this, then I think it's important to have a debate about the policy specifics of what a reparation policy looks like. So we also ask you to go to that reparations page that is up there, gogreen2026.com reparations, and fill out the petition to allow us to be on the debate stage so that we could bring this conversation beyond your show, Hal, and onto the debate stage so that every Marylander gets to hear our ideas for this along with the Democrats and the Republicans.
Well, democracy definitely doesn't look like two Republicrats arguing over, which tax cut is best for, which billionaire's tax cut is best for working people. Right. I would agree. And we certainly saw the antithesis of democracy in that the debates between Biden and Trump and Harris and Trump. There was one for of each of those. And that kind of moves us to the next point. Now, as I mentioned, I do look at people like AOC as part of the problem. When she goes on the debate stage, or at the DNC rather, not the debate stage, at the DNC, and lies and says that Kamala Harris is working tirelessly for a ceasefire, I think that she's making things worse. When she attacks Jill Stein, I think she's making things worse. She's reducing the chance that we can move away from this pernicious system that we have now. I got into it with a guy a little bit, not too, I mean, I think it was mostly very amicable, but he made the point, and he was talking, I think it's a he, I should say they really, they made the point that the political system we live in now is broken, and you need community action, self-help, co-ops, that is the direction we need to move in, because the political system isn't going to get where we want to go. And they ended by saying people hate the Democrats. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. But it's not that people don't want change. They do. We want universal. We want single payer health care. We want an end to military support for Ukraine and Israel. We want higher taxes on the wealthy, much higher. I mean, there's no question. These surveys after surveys show this. So the solution is actually political, but we need to embrace an alternative to the Republicrats that will support these both morally essential and popular programs. Their response was, no, we're not going to get them. It doesn't matter if you have a Green Party. It's not going to happen. The system is not designed to allow for that kind of change. And by putting it out there, by saying, yeah, support Butch Ware and Jill Stein, by support Andy Ellis, you're giving people false hope. You're allowing them to put their faith in a chimera, and that's not the solution. We need to organize locally to make our lives and our communities better, period, and then look at a true revolution that completely upends the system. Okay, that's my speech. You go ahead and respond.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's truth in that. If we believe that the solution alone lies in electoral politics, we're going to be disappointed. But I think that along with building community self-reliance, community self-defense, cooperative networks, and whatever else you are identifying there as part of and mutual aid societies, we need all that stuff. All of that stuff is important, and we need all of it. And I think one of the important lessons that comes from Maryland as we think about truncated Reconstruction, slave owners retaking power by 1867, is that a Black civil society and a worker civil society emerged despite Democrats in Maryland in order to provide for the needs of Black folks and provide for the needs of workers. And we need to not forget that when we're talking about solutions to this problem, and understand that communities who need to survive have relied on self-reliance, cooperative networks, communal activity, mutual aid, community self-defense all along. And we need to understand where our politics situate within that. So I don't think it is an either or. And I think if we situate it as an either or, we're all screwed. We're stuck in a situation where neither of those things are going to work. But I think the Green Party can be an effective means of leveraging power for communities that are engaging in those activities that Matt is talking about. And I think that we need to think about ourselves that way. We need to have a theory of action that allows our ballot line to be a lever for the communities that Matt is talking about, and for places that are not being served by the two-party system, so that they can, one, expose the problems of the two-party system. So I think there's a revolutionary power to third parties, which is to expose the party of the bourgeois white supremacist parties that we have right now. Then I think there's a reformist possibility for third parties right now, which allow those people who are representing those communities within the existing status quo to have more leverage in negotiations in Annapolis or in Baltimore or whatever. And then I think there's a third part of it that comes from those things, which is building power in order to implement our own policies, right? So it's like the first step is expose what could be possible through policy and through electoral politics while doing all the other stuff. The second step is help the reformers who are trying to use the existing system to have more leverage at the ballot box. And the third is to take and gain power in order to be able to implement policies that help co-ops, that help community self-defense, that help mutual aid, that help community self-determination, and that help communities be able to have democratic control over their own institutions. So I don't disagree with what Matt is saying. And I think we need to understand that perspective and figure out how we become part of that solution instead of becoming an institutional release valve for folks who hope that the system will yield the results that they want. I think that's sort of what they're getting at. Is right now, Green Party is an institutional third party. Libertarians are an institutional third party. And they're an off-ramp or an escape path for people who want to participate in liberal politics, but don't like either of the two parties. I think we need to have a very clear theory of action that aligns our ballot line and the power that it has with those communities fighting to build their own institutions and fighting for their survival.
All right, just a couple more quick questions, kind of following up on what you said, maybe narrowing the scope a little bit. And you might have answered this, but I didn't hear it if you did. Do you share my critique, let's put it that way, of the so-called progressives, the Progressive Caucus in Congress, and of Bernie as well, that ultimately they're not serving the needs of the working class and the poor in this country, that in fact they're doing the opposite?
As they exist in a two-party system, I think they oftentimes provide false hope about the possibility of that two-party system offering alternatives. I don't think it's terrible in a world in which there is a healthy multi-party system and a party like the Green Party is healthy and contesting for power. I don't think it's terrible to have progressives on the left edge of the Democratic Party. But I think that they're only powerful in a world in which there is a threat to leave that party and move to a different and form a coalition with somebody else. So, like right now, in a world where they stop the emergence, they are just as powerful and important in stopping the emergence of a third party or of a people's party of some sort as Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries are. Yes, I agree with you. I don't think they don't have a place in transforming the world to see what we want it to be. But that place has to include allowing options outside of the two-party system. Otherwise, we're not going to get what they're asking for, or they say they're asking for.
All right, and my final question, and I'll give you a final bite of the apple after you answer it. Andy, I go back, I'm just going to give a little bit, just a statement first, is I go back and forth about the ultimate hope that I have that the Green Party can become a viable player, that it actually will have real impact in policy discussions and will be able to actually move legislation. I go back and forth, and on most days lately, I've become more pessimistic. What do you think? Can you all become the Republicans of the 21st century, the Republican Party of the 1850s? Can you be that party in the 21st century?
So I think that's a fascinating way to put it, because I would say we're more aligned with where the Liberty Party was in 1844, which was an abolitionist party that was standing strong on solid value-based solutions like abolition. And when the Liberty Party went away, then the Free Soil Party emerged, and then the Republican Party emerged. And so the Green Party may not be the Republican Party. The Green Party may be a vehicle for us to transition away from this two-party system into a new system. And it may be a vehicle that goes away at some point and allows the emergence of a larger, more organized, people-centered party that is focused on justice, focused on racial and economic and environmental justice. So if that happens, great. Right? Like, I am not going to be sad if the Green Party paves the way for a 21st century Republican Party. I'm not going to be sad if the Green Party goes the way of the Liberty Party and, is not the vehicle that gets us from start to finish, but is the vehicle that helps to begin or helps to take part with the unraveling of the unjust system that we have right now and the rebuilding of a new one that's better.
All right, Andy, and I know as this year continues, we're going to have you back to talk about a lot of other issues. Your campaign is certainly not just about reparations, but that is a important plank in the platform and one that we're centering right now because of the legislation in Maryland. But we'll talk about many other issues as we move forward. But I do want to give you a final bite. Anything you just want to throw out there, add, tell people to go to your website, which they've seen throughout the program, anything you'd like to promote?
Yeah, so thank you so much for having this opportunity, Hal. I think it is really important that we have conversations like this across lines of potential disagreement, so that we can get toward more unity, so that we can understand where each other are coming from and things like that. So I appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion where we might disagree a little bit on this. Coming up in the next couple of months, we're going to be unveiling our policy for a solidarity economy, which includes many of the other things that we've talked about here, and outlines a vision for what Maryland's economy looks like in the next 10 years. And then after that, we're going to focus on our efforts for grassroots democracy in order to put the power back in the hands of people. So I'd love to come back and talk about each of those with the level of depth that we've talked about this. It's been really a good opportunity. And then the last plug I'll make is June 14th is the 25th anniversary assembly of the Maryland Green Party. Most American third parties do not last for 25 years. The two parties have a way of grinding them down before that ever happens. So it's a real accomplishment that the Maryland Green Party has been here for 25 years. And we're going to celebrate that accomplishment June 14th at the Bush Library in Annapolis. We'd love to see you and any of your listeners there. We're going to talk about the history of the work that we've done. We're going to talk about what's happening right now in 2025 and 2026. And then we're going to talk about what the next 25 years look like and think about a world in which Maryland, we can have a Maryland that works for everybody and there's no inequality and that justice has come.
Well, I have already signed up. I've already RSVP'd, so I will be in Annapolis on the 14th. I will put a link. I wasn't sure if you wanted me to do that, but obviously you do. So I will go ahead and put a link in the show description at some point so that folks can sign up, and you can also Google it. But I've been to a few of those, and they're really great. So I look forward to that as well. Andy, thanks so much. Thanks for running. Thanks for fighting for everybody in the state and around the world.
Thank you, Hal. I appreciate it so much, and I look forward to the next one.
All right, we'll talk again. Andy and I will talk again soon. That's going to do it for me. That'll do it for him, of course, as well for today's program. And I'll be back